For a deeper dive into all of this, let's bring in Sly James. He's the former mayor of Kansas City, Missouri, and has lived the experience that some local leaders are confronting now. Mr. James, it is great to be with you. You were actually in office at the same time that Michael Brown was shot and killed by police in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. That shooting, of course, led to a major uprising there and across the country. How do you compare the aftermath in Ferguson to what you've been seeing in Kenosha?
Well, I think that the aftermaths are fairly similar, except for one major difference. The latter incidents have all been captured on videotape from multiple angles, and it's been shown to people who previously had not believed that those types of things existed. We in the African American community have known that these things have existed for decades. The difference was that you could never prove it because you were always fighting against a police report written by police officers, and there was seldom, if ever, any video evidence of it. Now the difference is that everything is captured on video, and it's being shown to people, and people are starting to wake up to what's going on. Now, that doesn't excuse any violence whatsoever. Martin Luther King had it right. Nonviolent protests is the way to go, in my opinion, and I think most of the people would agree with that. The violence distracts from the message, and the message is too important to be distracted from.
Well, it seems as though that the message is starting to permeate, but we also thought that that was the case, in all due respect, after Ferguson. However, it doesn't seem that it's changed that much in terms of black and brown people being disproportionately killed by police in this country. What do you think needs to happen to finally see substantial change? I know that that you worked very hard in Ferguson to try and usher in reforms into your community and to the policing there. Do you think that that's what needs to happen elsewhere across the country, or does this country need a greater overhaul from top to bottom in terms of how we utilize and train police?
Well, the country needs a greater overhaul on a lot of different levels, and Winston Fisher and I allude to that in our book, The Opportunity Agenda. There's a lot of things that need to be done. But two things that are at the heart of these problems are disproportionately inequitable educational opportunities, which then deny African Americans the opportunity to fully participate in this economy. And then the other thing is that there is no economic equity. Black folks have been segregated into various parts of cities, including my own, due to no fault of their own, but done intentionally by governmental and quasi-governmental acts. That's fairly and completely documented in The Color of Law, a book that's recently been published. The book that Winston and I wrote talk about such things as making sure that we are providing quality education, quality childcare, quality pre-K. We need to start at ground zero. And first and foremost, the people of this country need to be educated about the true Black experience, not the ones they were taught in grade school in the history books or in high school in the history books, which does not fully or completely or even accurately reflect the Black experience in this country. The Black experience in this country is real. We've lived it for decades. I've lived it all my life. But other people have no knowledge of it and think that there's just a bunch of complaining and bellyaching. That's not the case. So first of all, everybody needs to educate themselves, and that needs to be done with common language, and it needs to be done without people feeling guilty and retreating into their corners. The systemic racism in this country affects Black people, but it also affects white people. It affects them in a different way, but it certainly has a direct impact on Black people. But until we all figure it out, then we're always going to struggle with this. And the sad thing about it is that this is escalating. Last night or the other night, when that young man shot people with a gun laying in the street, that's an escalation that we should never have gotten to. And the reason we did get there is because we have no leadership that is trying to properly and positively direct this force in a way that really produces change. Until that happens, we're going to continue to have these incidents, and it's going to happen over and over again, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. Somebody needs to step up as a leader in this country, take note, and then actually do something about it. And that's not what we're seeing now. In fact, we see the current administration denying that racism in this country exists. That is simply a misnomer and a mistake. And it's one of those things that empowers people to act on their own, like that young man did the other night.
Yeah, when we call out falsehoods, that one is definitely a falsehood. Racism does exist in America, and I want to applaud you, sir, for recognizing and reminding everybody of the absolute fundamental importance of education if we're actually going to tackle this problem at a systemic level. I want to ask you quickly about the current NBA walkout, though. What do you believe that players are actually able to achieve with this sort of action, and do you think that this is the vanguard for bringing about actionable change because it reaches people in a different way?
It reaches people in a different way because folks across the country look at superstars, celebrities, athletes in a different way than they look at the average black man on the street. When the superstars and celebrities and athletes stand up and take a position, people watch and notice. For one, they don't like their entertainment disrupted. But for two, they also realize that if it's gotten to the level and the point where these people are actually standing up and saying something about it, then maybe it's time to listen a little bit closer. The problem that we have is that we cannot rely on the superstars, athletes, and celebrities to be the ones who carry the banner. This is a grassroots issue. This is an on-the-street issue. It needs to be handled at all levels of government, and it needs to start with every individual educating themselves and making a commitment to not engage in this type of racist behavior and to do everything they can to eradicate it from this country. Someone said the other night, it is difficult to understand how we can continue to love this country when this country does not love us back. And that's exactly what's happening. And it's going to get worse until somebody steps up as a leader and leads this country in a way that heals the wounds and brings people together, as opposed to exploiting those wounds for political purposes.
Well, tens of thousands are expected to gather tomorrow at the Lincoln Memorial to commemorate the historic 1963 Civil Rights March on Washington. In some ways, we see a lot of progress since that time, but there's also so many ways in which we're lacking. What do you hope the message will be for people coming out of that?
Well, I hope the message that people get is that it's time to recognize that people aren't in the street because they want to get out and exercise during a pandemic. They're out there because this is a persistent and chronic problem that has not adequately been addressed by the people in leadership in this country. But then again, the people of this country have not demanded that their leaders do something about it until now. Now there's a demand. And the interesting thing about this is different than in Ferguson is the fact that there are so many white folks that are involved in this conversation now. And it's just like the drug epidemic in the 60s. Everybody thought the drugs were confined to the black neighborhood until they hit the suburbs. Once they hit the suburbs, there was action. The situation now requires allies of all colors, people of good heart, people who, like Mrs. Blake's mother said, have examined their heart to look inside to see what's really important. At the end of the day, we're all Americans. And if we don't stand together, we will certainly fall apart.
Well said. Sly James, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Lana, and have a great day and take care.